When a Cherokee chief met the widow of a man killed in a conflict between their peoples, he never expected that a single whisper could change both their fates. What she said made him question everything he believed about honor, loss, and forgiveness. And what followed would alter the course of two worlds. Thank you so much for watching and for all your comments. Let me know at the end if you liked the story and where you're watching from and why you're following this. The western sun cast long shadows across the rolling hills of the Oklahoma Territory, 1871. A lone rider approached the outskirts of the settlement that had sprung up near Cherokee lands. Thomas Running Wolf, a young Cherokee chief of 28, sat tall in his saddle, his dark eyes scanning the horizon with practiced caution. The settlement represented everything his people had lost and continued to lose. Yet here he was, crossing the invisible boundary that separated two worlds. "You shouldn't be going there alone," his cousin had warned that morning. Not with tensions so high after the incident at Miller's Creek. But Thomas had responsibilities that transcended the growing hostility. The treaty negotiations were approaching, and he needed to understand the settlement better. His father, the respected Chief Gray Wolf, had taught him that knowledge was as powerful as any weapon. As he approached the main street, settlers' gazes followed him, some curious, some hostile. Thomas had grown accustomed to their stares. His traditional Cherokee clothing and the eagle feather in his hair marked him clearly, though he also wore elements of the white man's clothing, concessions to the changing times. Chief Running Wolf, called Samuel Parker, the settlement's aging storekeeper, one of the few settlers who treated the Cherokee with some measure of respect. "Didn't expect to see you here today." Thomas dismounted gracefully. "Mr. Parker, I need supplies." His English was flawless, educated at a mission school before returning to lead his people. "Come in then, though I should warn you, folks are on edge after what happened." "I had no part in that," Thomas said firmly. "Neither did my people." "I believe you," Samuel said, "but not everyone's as reasonable." Inside the store, Thomas selected essential items: coffee, flour, salt, ammunition for hunting. As Samuel tallied the purchases, the door opened, letting in a gust of autumn air, along with a young woman. She was perhaps 25, with chestnut hair pulled back beneath a simple bonnet. Her dress was plain but well kept, and she carried herself with quiet dignity, despite the obvious grief in her eyes. Thomas recognized her immediately. Sarah Hollister, widowed just 3 months ago when her husband was killed during the incident at Miller's Creek. The store fell silent. Sarah hesitated at the threshold, her eyes meeting Thomas's. Something passed between them. Recognition, perhaps, or shared understanding of loss. Thomas had lost his wife to fever 2 years prior. "Mrs. Hollister," Samuel greeted her gently. "I'll be with you in just a moment." Sarah nodded, keeping her distance from Thomas, though not with the same fear or hostility he'd come to expect. Instead, her gaze was assessing, thoughtful. "Your usual order is ready," Samuel told her. "And I received those seeds you were asking after." "Thank you, Mr. Parker," she replied, her voice soft but steady. "And the books? Came in yesterday. I set them aside for you." Thomas finished his transaction and gathered his supplies, intending to leave without further interaction. But as he turned to go, Sarah spoke, her voice just loud enough for him to hear. "Chief Running Wolf." Thomas paused, surprised at being addressed directly. "Mrs. Hollister, they say you speak for peace at the council fires." Thomas studied her face, looking for mockery or accusation, but found only genuine inquiry. "I do. Even after everything that's happened?" "Especially after everything that's happened." He shifted his parcels. "My people have seen enough of war and death." Sarah's eyes shimmered with unspoken emotion. "As have I." Thomas nodded respectfully and moved toward the door, feeling the weight of the settlement's stares. "Chief," she said suddenly, causing him to turn back, "there's a matter I wish to discuss regarding the land near Wolf Creek. It borders both properties. Perhaps—" Samuel cleared his throat nervously. "Mrs. Hollister, I don't think— I need to speak with him," she insisted with surprising firmness. "It concerns the water rights my late husband and I were discussing with the Cherokee before everything happened." Thomas considered her carefully. Her husband had indeed been more reasonable than most settlers, willing to negotiate fair access to the creek that ran through both properties. His death had ended those talks. "I can meet you at the creek tomorrow," Thomas offered cautiously. "Midday." Sarah nodded, ignoring the disapproving looks from two women who had entered the store. "I'll be there." As Thomas rode away, his thoughts remained on the widow's face, the courage it must have taken to address him publicly, the whispers that would surely follow, and somewhere beneath his carefully maintained reserve, he felt a flicker of something he hadn't experienced in a long time. Curiosity about a future that might hold more than just survival. The creek border would be a beginning. Of what, he wasn't yet certain. Wolf Creek sparkled under the midday sun, its waters rushing over smooth stones as it carved its path through the contested lands. Thomas arrived early, dismounting by a large cottonwood tree to wait. He had spent a restless night thinking about this meeting, questioning his decision to come alone. The tribal elders would have counseled caution, perhaps even sending warriors to hide in the surrounding woods, but Thomas believed such measures would only reinforce the settlers' fear of his people. He knelt by the creek, cupping the cold water in his hands and drinking deeply. This land spoke to him in ways the settlers would never understand, the whispers of ancestors, the songs of the earth. Yet he was pragmatic enough to know that holding on to these spiritual connections while finding common ground with the newcomers was the only path forward. The sound of an approaching wagon drew his attention. Sarah Hollister handled the reins with confidence, guiding her horse toward the meeting place. She wore a practical dress of blue cotton, her hair covered with a simple kerchief against the sun. Thomas noted that she carried no visible weapon, a sign of trust he found both surprising and admirable. "You came alone," he observed as he helped her down from the wagon. "As did you," she replied, her eyes taking in his solitary presence. "My neighbors thought I was mad to meet a Cherokee alone, especially you, especially me, the young chief with the reputation for being unpredictable," she said, a hint of challenge in her voice. "Some say you're dangerous because you understand both worlds too well." Thomas allowed himself a small smile. "And what do you say, Mrs. Hollister?" "I say that understanding both worlds might be exactly what we need right now." She reached into her wagon and withdrew a roll of paper. "I brought my husband's maps of the creek." They spread the map on a flat rock by the water's edge, using small stones to weigh down the corners. Sarah's finger traced the blue line of the creek, showing where it divided her property from Cherokee land. "James believed the creek could serve both our needs," she explained. "He designed a system where your people could use the upper waters for fishing and ceremonies, while we could channel some of the lower section for our crops without disrupting your use." Thomas studied the careful drawings, impressed by the thoughtfulness behind them. "Your husband was a forward-thinking man." Sarah's expression softened. "He was. He believed peaceful coexistence was possible." Her voice wavered slightly. "Even after he was killed, I couldn't let go of that belief." "The incident at Miller's Creek," Thomas said quietly. "Many blame my people, but not you specifically." "No, I was meeting with government officials in Fort Smith when it happened." Thomas met her gaze directly. "But I lost people there too, Mrs. Hollister. 2 young men from my tribe." Sarah nodded, a shared grief passing between them. "No one speaks of them. Few settlers count Cherokee lives when tallying their losses." An uncomfortable silence fell between them, broken only by the gentle babbling of the creek. "I still want to implement James's plan," Sarah finally said. "I can't work this land alone, and your people need the water. We can help each other." Thomas studied her face, searching for hidden motives and finding none. "The other settlers won't approve." "I'm not asking their permission," she said with sudden fierceness. "This is my land now, and I'll manage it as I see fit. Even if it makes you an outcast?" "I'm already half an outcast, Chief Running Wolf. A widow who refuses to remarry or sell her land doesn't fit neatly into their expectations." Thomas felt a reluctant admiration for her determination. "What exactly are you proposing?" "A formal agreement. Your people help with the irrigation system and the harvest when the time comes. In exchange, you have permanent access to the creek and a share of the crops." It was a bold proposal, one that would face opposition from both sides. Yet Thomas saw the wisdom in it. His people needed reliable food sources as their hunting grounds diminished, and Sarah needed labor that the settlement couldn't or wouldn't provide. I will need to discuss this with my counsel, he said finally. Of course. She rolled up the map. And I have something else to discuss. From her wagon, Sarah retrieved a small wooden box. Opening it, she revealed a collection of beaded jewelry and small carvings. These belong to a Cherokee family, she explained. James found them after some young men from the settlement raided an abandoned cabin last year. He meant to return them. Thomas carefully lifted a necklace of polished stones and animal teeth, a medicine man's ceremonial piece. This belonged to Standing Bear's family. They fled to the nations in the south after their home was burned. Then they should have these returned, she said simply. Thomas looked at her with new eyes. Why are you doing this, Mrs. Hollister? Sarah's gaze dropped to her hands, which bore the calluses of hard work. When James died, I whispered something to him as he took his last breath. I promised I would live by his principles, that I wouldn't let grief turn to hatred. She looked up at Thomas, her eyes clear and determined. When I saw you in the store yesterday, standing there proudly despite everyone's stares, I whispered to myself, he still has a heart, after everything his people have endured. And if you can maintain your humanity, how can I do any less? Thomas felt something shift inside him, walls built of caution and bitter experience beginning to crack. This woman spoke a truth he had almost forgotten in the struggle to protect his people. Before he could respond, shouting erupted from the direction of the settlement. 3 riders approached rapidly, rifles visible in their saddle holsters. Thomas recognized Nathan Calloway, one of the most outspoken against the Cherokee. Sarah, Calloway called, get away from him. Sarah straightened, stepping slightly in front of Thomas in a gesture that surprised them both. Mr. Calloway, I'm conducting business on my own property. Business with a savage who'd as soon scalp you as look at you, Calloway sneered, his hand hovering near his rifle. Thomas remained still, his face impassive despite the burning anger he felt. One wrong move could trigger violence that would spread far beyond this creek. Chief Running Wolf is here at my invitation, Sarah said firmly, and you are not. James would turn in his grave if he could see you now, another rider spat. Sarah's voice remained steady, though Thomas could see her hands trembling. James would stand exactly where I'm standing, Mr. Reed. Now please leave my property. The standoff stretched for several tense moments before Calloway finally jerked his head at his companions. This isn't over. The settlement council will hear about this. As they rode away, Sarah released a shaky breath. Thomas touched her arm lightly. You've made powerful enemies today. They were never friends, she replied, attempting a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Will you still consider my proposal after this? Thomas gazed at the retreating riders, then back to the determined woman beside him. I will do more than consider it, Mrs. Hollister. I believe we can make it work. As they parted ways, Thomas watched Sarah's wagon until it disappeared around the bend. The boundary between their worlds had begun to blur at the edges, creating a space where perhaps, just perhaps, something new could grow. Autumn painted the Oklahoma hills in brilliant hues of crimson and gold as Thomas led a small group of Cherokee men toward Sarah's farm. 6 weeks had passed since their meeting at Wolf Creek, weeks filled with careful negotiations, opposition from both sides, and the first tentative steps toward cooperation. Today marked a milestone, the completion of the irrigation channels that would serve both communities. Gray clouds hung low in the sky, promising the first cold rain of the season. Thomas felt the weight of responsibility as they approached Sarah's property. The tribal council had finally approved the arrangement after heated debate, but some still believed he was leading their people into a trap. The spirits send us warning, muttered White Hawk, the eldest of their group, pointing to the gathering storm. No good comes from trusting the settlers. The spirits send rain to bless our work, Thomas countered firmly. This irrigation system will feed our children through the winter. They crested the final hill to see Sarah working alongside 3 Cherokee women who had arrived earlier. The sight stopped Thomas mid-stride. The women, including his younger sister, Morning Star, were laughing with Sarah as they harvested the last of the season's corn. It was an image he had never expected to witness, genuine camaraderie across the boundaries that had separated their peoples. Sarah looked up, shielding her eyes against the dim light. Even at this distance, Thomas could see her face brighten when she spotted him. Something warm unfurled in his chest, a feeling he had been fighting with diminishing success. Chief Running Wolf, she called, setting down her basket and walking toward them. "You've brought reinforcements just in time." The formality they had maintained in their early meetings had gradually softened, though Thomas still struggled with the propriety of their growing friendship. The settlement had indeed turned against Sarah, just as Calloway had threatened. She was no longer welcome in many homes, and the church minister had publicly questioned her judgment. "The storm won't wait much longer," Thomas replied, dismounting. "We should finish the main channel today." The men set to work immediately, digging the final section that would connect Wolf Creek to the network of smaller channels crossing both properties. Sarah worked alongside them, her hands as muddy as any of theirs, her determination never flagging despite the increasingly bitter wind. "Your sister has been teaching me Cherokee words," Sarah told Thomas during a brief rest. "Though she laughs at my pronunciation, she enjoys having another woman to talk with," Thomas said. "Many in our village were skeptical of her coming here, but she insisted." Sarah's smile faded slightly. "Like many were skeptical of you working with me?" "Yes." Thomas didn't soften the truth. "There is fear on both sides. Generations of it. Yet here we are." Sarah gestured to the fields where Cherokee and settler technologies combined to create something new, creating something together instead of destroying. Thomas nodded, allowing himself to hope, just briefly, that their small example might spread beyond these fields. The first heavy raindrops began to fall as they completed the final section. The group hurried to gather tools and harvest baskets, seeking shelter in Sarah's modest cabin. It was a tight fit, 9 adults in a space built for a small family, but the atmosphere was one of shared accomplishment rather than discomfort. Sarah stoked the fire while Morningstar helped distribute food, cornbread and stew that they had prepared together that morning. The symbolism wasn't lost on Thomas. 2 traditions blending at the hearth, the heart of any home. As they ate, the rain intensified, drumming against the roof and turning the newly dug channels into rushing streams. Through the window, Thomas could see their handiwork already functioning, directing the water where it needed to go, preventing flooding in some areas while ensuring others received enough moisture. A good omen, Whitehawk admitted grudgingly, his earlier skepticism softened by the successful completion of their work and the warm food in his belly. The conversation flowed more easily than Thomas had expected, with Sarah asking thoughtful questions about Cherokee customs and sharing stories of her journey west from Pennsylvania 3 years earlier. As the others talked, Thomas found his gaze repeatedly drawn to her, the animated way she used her hands when explaining something, the respect with which she listened to even the most traditional of his people. When Whitehawk began telling an old tribal story, Sarah listened with such genuine interest that the elder gradually directed his words specifically to her, explaining the nuances that an outsider would typically miss. Thomas felt a surge of pride in both of them, in Whitehawk for opening himself to new possibilities, and in Sarah for her sincere effort to understand. The storm showed no signs of abating as evening approached. Thomas made the decision to return to the village despite the weather, not wanting to strain the fragile trust they were building by staying overnight at a settler's home. "At least wait until the worst passes," Sarah urged, concern evident in her voice. "We know these lands in all weathers," Thomas assured her, "and our people will worry if we're gone too long." Sarah nodded in understanding. As the others prepared to leave, she pulled Thomas aside, speaking quietly. "There's a settlement council meeting tomorrow. Nathan Calloway has called for action against—" She hesitated. "Against those who consort with Indians." Thomas felt a flash of anger. "He threatens you directly?" "Not in so many words, but the meaning is clear." Her chin lifted defiantly. "I'm not afraid of him." "Perhaps you should be," Thomas said seriously. "Men like Calloway are most dangerous when they believe they're losing influence." "I won't abandon what we've started," Sarah insisted. "This partnership is already bearing fruit. The irrigation system works better than James ever imagined." Thomas studied her face, admiring her courage while fearing its consequences. "Be careful. Send word if there's trouble." As they prepared to depart, Sarah pressed a small package wrapped in oilcloth into Thomas's hands. "Seeds," she explained, "from my family's home in Pennsylvania. Different from what your people typically grow, but they'll thrive here with proper care." The simple gift carried profound meaning. Seeds represented future, hope, Continuation. Thomas accepted them with appropriate solemnity. "We will plant them when spring returns. And I'll help," she promised. Their eyes held for a moment longer than necessary. Thomas felt the watching gazes of his companions and reluctantly stepped back. "Until next time, Mrs. Hollister." "Sarah," she corrected softly. "After all we've accomplished together, I think you might call me Sarah." Thunder rumbled overhead, but Thomas barely noticed. "Sarah," he repeated, her name feeling right in his mouth despite everything that should have made it forbidden. As they rode away through the curtain of rain, Morning Star moved her horse alongside his. "She has a good heart," his sister observed. "Yes," Thomas agreed simply, knowing his sister could see more in his face than he wished to reveal. "The path you're considering," Morning Star said carefully, "it will not be easy." Thomas didn't pretend to misunderstand. Some paths are worth the difficulty. They rode in silence after that, the rain washing away their tracks behind them as they crossed the invisible boundary between Sarah's land and Cherokee territory, a boundary that seemed increasingly meaningless to Thomas with each passing day. The first snow of winter fell gently outside the window of Thomas's cabin as he examined the treaty document one final time. After months of negotiation, the agreement between his band of Cherokee and the territorial government was nearly complete. A small victory in the larger struggle, but significant nonetheless. It guaranteed their rights to their current lands for at least another generation and formalized the water-sharing arrangement that had begun with Sarah's farm. Sarah. Her name in his thoughts brought both warmth and uncertainty. Their partnership had evolved over the autumn months into something neither had anticipated. The boundaries between their separate worlds had blurred, then gradually dissolved, leaving them in uncharted territory. Though no words of romance had been spoken, Thomas knew his feelings had grown beyond friendship or alliance. A knock at his door interrupted his contemplation. He opened it to find Morning Star, snow dusting her shoulders and worry lining her face. "Riders coming," she said without preamble. "From the settlement. Samuel Parker is leading them." Thomas grabbed his coat. "How many?" "5 men. They're at the council house now." Thomas hurried through the snow-covered village toward the large log structure where the tribal council gathered. Inside, he found Samuel Parker standing before the council elders, his expression grave. The storekeeper had remained one of the few settlers who treated the Cherokee with respect, often serving as an intermediary between the communities. "Chief Running Wolf," Samuel acknowledged, relief evident in his tired eyes. "I've come on urgent business." "What's happened?" Thomas asked, immediately thinking of Sarah. "There's been trouble at the settlement. Nathan Calloway and his followers have taken control of the council." Samuel's hands twisted nervously. "They've been threatening anyone who deals fairly with the Cherokee." Whitehawk, now fully supportive of the partnership with Sarah after seeing its benefits, leaned forward. "The widow Hollister?" Samuel nodded grimly. "They went to her farm yesterday, a dozen men or more. Said they were holding a trial for her actions." Thomas felt a cold that had nothing to do with the winter weather. "What actions?" "Betrayal of her race," they called it. "Conspiracy with Indians. They claim she surrendered settlement lands by allowing Cherokee to work them." Samuel's voice dropped. "They set fire to her barn." Anger surged through Thomas, hot and immediate. "And Sarah? She stood against them with a shotgun until they left, but they're returning today with the marshal from Fort Smith. Calloway convinced him that she's harboring hostile Indians and stealing water rights. The marshal knows of our agreement," Thomas argued. "The territorial governor himself approved it." "The marshal knows what Calloway told him," Samuel replied. "And Calloway has powerful friends in the territorial legislature." Thomas turned to the council elders. "I must go." Whitehawk shook his head. "This is settler business. Their quarrels are not ours." "Sarah Hollister made our business hers when no one else would," Thomas countered. "She stood against her own people for justice. Will we do less?" The oldest elder, Spotted Deer, raised his gnarled hand for silence. "The young chief speaks truth. The woman honored our ways and returned our sacred items. She has earned the right to call on Cherokee help." Thomas bowed his head in respect. "I will take 10 men, no more. We go in peace, but prepared." "I'll ride ahead," Samuel offered. "Let Sarah know you're coming. Maybe convince the marshal to wait for the facts." As Thomas gathered his most trusted men, Morning Star approached with his ceremonial vest and the eagle feather that symbolized his authority as chief. "You go as our leader," she said, helping him don the vest. "Remember that your actions today speak for all Cherokee." Thomas clasped his sister's hands. "I will bring no shame to our people." "And what of your heart?" she asked softly. "Does it guide you today as much as your duty?" Thomas couldn't deny it. "Yes, but the two are not in conflict." Morning Star smiled knowingly. "Perhaps that is your answer then, brother." The snow was falling more heavily as the Cherokee riders set out. Thomas led them at a steady pace, mindful of the treacherous footing but driven by urgency. The journey to Sarah's farm had never felt longer. They approached cautiously, keeping to the tree line until they could assess the situation. The scene that greeted them made Thomas's heart sink. A group of at least 20 men surrounded Sarah's cabin. Her barn was a charred ruin, still smoking despite the snow. A man in a marshal's coat stood on the porch, pounding on the door. "Mrs. Hollister," the marshal called, "you're ordered to open this door by the authority of the United States government." There was no response from inside. Thomas scanned the gathered men, noting that many were armed. Calloway stood near the front, satisfaction evident on his face even at this distance. Thomas made a quick decision, gesturing for his men to remain hidden while he rode forward alone. He emerged from the trees, sitting tall in his saddle, his chief's regalia visible to all. A ripple of alarm went through the crowd as he approached. The marshal turned, his hand moving to his pistol. "Who are you?" he demanded. "I am Chief Thomas Running Wolf of the Cherokee," Thomas announced clearly, "and you are trespassing on land protected by treaty with the territorial government." Calloway stepped forward. "This is settlement land, Indian. The woman has no right to invite your kind here." "This land belongs to Sarah Hollister by legal title," Thomas replied evenly, "and our water-sharing agreement was approved by Governor Williams himself." The marshal frowned. "I was told no such agreement existed." "Then you were misled." Thomas dismounted, moving with deliberate calm. "There are documents inside that cabin that prove the legality of our arrangement." "Convenient," Calloway sneered. "Hidden away where no one can see them." "Not hidden," came Sarah's voice as the cabin door opened slightly. "I've been trying to show the marshal, but these men wouldn't let him near enough to see." She stood in the doorway, shotgun still in hand but lowered. Her face was smudged with soot, and a cut marked her forehead, but her eyes blazed with defiance. Thomas fought to maintain his composure at the sight of her injury. "Are you hurt?" "Nothing serious," she replied, her voice softening slightly at his concern. The marshal looked between them, uncertainty creasing his brow. "Mrs. Hollister, I've been instructed to remove you from this property pending investigation of water rights violations." "There are no violations," Sarah insisted. "Everything was properly filed with the territorial office. The documents are here, along with Governor Williams' signature." Thomas addressed the marshal directly. "Sir, I have 10 warriors in those trees. We haven't come for bloodshed, but we will protect what is rightfully ours under law. I suggest you examine the evidence before taking action you might regret." A tense silence fell over the scene. The marshal studied Thomas for a long moment, then nodded curtly. "Show me these documents, Mrs. Hollister. The rest of you, stand down." Calloway's face contorted with rage. "You're taking the word of a squaw-loving Cherokee over your own kind?" "I'm doing my job," the marshal snapped, "which is to uphold the law, not settle your personal vendettas." Thomas moved to Sarah's side as she retrieved the documents. Up close, he could see the exhaustion in her face, the strain of standing alone against her neighbors. "You came," she whispered. "Did you doubt I would?" Her eyes met his, conveying more than words could express. "No, not really." Inside the cabin, they spread the documents on the table. The marshal examined them carefully, paying particular attention to the governor's signature and seal. "These appear legitimate," he finally concluded. "The water-sharing agreement is legal, as is the labor exchange." Calloway, who had pushed his way inside despite the marshal's orders, pointed accusingly at Sarah. "She's betrayed everything we stand for, living with Indians, learning their heathen ways." "I've betrayed nothing but hatred and ignorance," Sarah interrupted. "Everything I've done has been within my rights as a landowner and an American citizen." The marshal folded the documents and handed them back to Sarah. "Mrs. Hollister is within her legal rights. This partnership benefits both communities and has proper authorization. He turned to Calloway. Your complaint is dismissed. Furthermore, you'll answer for the destruction of Mrs. Hollister's property. Arson is a serious offense, Mr. Calloway. As the marshal led a protesting Calloway outside, Sarah sagged against the table, the strength that had sustained her finally ebbing. Thomas caught her gently. You should sit. I'm fine, she insisted, though she allowed him to help her to a chair. Just tired. They've been watching the farm for days, intimidating the Cherokee women who came to work. Thomas examined the cut on her forehead, his touch feather-light. This needs tending. It's nothing. She captured his hand in hers. Thomas, I need to tell you something. After yesterday, after they burned the barn, I had time to think about what matters most. Outside, they could hear the marshal ordering the men to disperse. Thomas was acutely aware of this moment balanced on a knife's edge, their two worlds briefly suspended between what was and what could be. When I came west with James, Sarah continued, I thought I knew what my life would be. But when he died, I thought I knew what it had become. Just survival, just enduring. She stood, still holding his hand. But these past months, working with you, building something meaningful together, I've found purpose again, and something else I never expected. Thomas felt his heartbeat quicken. Sarah, I love you, she said simply, against all reason and convention and sense. I love your wisdom and your strength, and your vision for a future where our peoples can live together. Thomas stood silent, momentarily overwhelmed by her courage in speaking what he had only allowed himself to feel in private moments. I understand if you can't, she began, misinterpreting his silence. Thomas stopped her words by gently touching her face. My silence isn't hesitation, Sarah. It's wonder. He smiled, a rare, full smile that transformed his serious features. I've loved you since that day at the creek, when you stood between me and those riders without fear. Outside, his men had emerged from hiding and were speaking with the marshal, their presence ensuring the remaining settlers kept their distance. This fragile moment belonged to Thomas and Sarah alone. The path ahead won't be easy, he warned, echoing Morningstar's words. Few worthwhile paths are, Sarah replied, but we've already proven that boundaries can be crossed, that new beginnings are possible. Thomas drew her carefully into his arms, mindful of her injuries. My people have a saying, when two rivers join, they cannot be separated again without changing the land forever. We have already joined our rivers, Sarah. Then let them flow together, she whispered, and carve a new path through this land. As the snow fell softly outside, Thomas Running Wolf kissed Sarah Hollister in the cabin that stood between two worlds, a simple act of love that defied generations of division. In that moment, both understood that their partnership had evolved into something far more profound, a bridge between communities, a promise of reconciliation, and a love that refused to recognize the arbitrary boundaries drawn by history and hatred. Spring would come, and they would plant Sarah's seeds in Cherokee soil. They would rebuild what had been destroyed, stronger than before. And perhaps in their small corner of the Oklahoma Territory, they would nurture the beginnings of a new understanding between peoples who had viewed each other as enemies for too long. The young chief and the settler's widow had found in each other the courage to look beyond the past, to whisper, "You still have a heart across the divide," and to build a future neither could have imagined alone.